Tom? Oh, that's fine. Great. So Tom, I think it's great that you brought up about culture. We now know, Tom's talked about, we know one exists. The real question is, what's the cookbook? What's the recipe for the rest of the community here to take that back and build that culture? Because culture is the air around us. Describe that air. So describe this innovation culture. We're ready.
I'm going to tell a quick story. You ready? It's very quick. There's a survey that some higher education institutions give each year or every other year called the MISO survey. Is anybody familiar with MISO?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
So it's the Merged Information Services Organization survey. My organization participated in this. And I also saw, of course, the summary answers. And there's a whole series, a core series of questions that everybody asks. And there are also some additional questions that you can add just to test the waters. So one of the questions we asked was, do you know what to do with your innovative ideas? And I thought it was fascinating that in most organizations, the faculty said yes. And the students said yes. And the staff said not applicable.
Yeah.
Is that fascinating? I think it's very pertinent when we think about culture and moving our organizations on a dime.
So, Tom, any thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say three things. I think there's three main components to this. The first piece is sort of an alignment piece, in that if you want to create a culture that can do anything, you want to do it really well, the people in the organization need to be aligned in some sense in terms of commonality of core values, mission, and vision. So there's some direction as to where you want to go. You've got to say that innovation is okay. You've got to say that it's okay for anybody to create a value proposition, from the janitor to the CEO in your organization, and bring it forward, because people won't come forward if they're going to get whacked down. So creating clarity of your organizational values and culture is the first step to that. The second piece of that is having some way to actually understand what innovation means in your organization. So that's about an innovation design, if you will. And it is a set of, there are different ways to do it. For a long time I thought it was all about being just creative, but I also learned that there are structured disciplines that one can take, like through value propositions and through iteration of value propositions with many customers and stakeholders. You get an exponential improvement if you do enough of those. So you get to the point of you actually build what the customers want. That's the biggest thing, because a lot of products fail because people don't build what customers want and will buy. So you get on target that way. And the third piece of it is the actual culture itself, the closing the loop of that, is that when people do step up and they take risk and they move forward, you reward that. You reward people for excellence. I mean, people focus a lot on money, but it's not all about money. Particularly in higher ed, there isn't a lot of money to go around. But people really like to be recognized for excellence, both individually and as a team. They'll tell you sometimes, I don't want you to do a public celebration, and I've interviewed and surveyed a lot of groups, and they don't do this, but it actually is really meaningful. You do need to celebrate your values, your victories, your milestones, and do that in a way that's public, and at least within your group, so that it inspires other people to step up to a higher standard. And so it's basically organizational alignment at the other end, reinforcing the behavior you want to see, and in the middle, understanding what it means in your context to innovate. For a lot of us, we're going to do lots of incremental innovations. We're not going to create disruptive innovations left and right. We're not the next product, but in some cases you will be. So, but you can create that environment to have that happen.
Yeah, I think that obviously the culture is what's rewarded, right? So it's what you do, and it's what gets rewarded. And I think that's an important thing. I know for us, we have public celebrations of innovation, and I think we also try to celebrate failures, quick failures. And I think that's how you build up this tolerance to risk, right? By recognizing when something doesn't work and no one got their head handed to them. The guillotine did not come down and chop them off. Anybody else have any interesting stories about recognizing culture and more?
Yeah, so I don't know if I need the mic. Yeah, hi. So I'm with EMC Corporation. We have a similar program. You brought up some fascinating points, and I'm hoping that our program touches on a number of those things. But first, I want to kind of lay out what we do and then ask you a question. So we have this thing called the Innovation Showcase, where we work with every EVP within our organization that represent all of our business units. And it's basically an annual idea competition, right? So this past year, and it's been going on for 5-6 years now. So this past year, we had 2,200 ideas from across the entire organization. And then basically 28 different sponsoring organizations. It's kind of where tops down meets bottoms up innovation, right? The executives work with really their SVPs, and then they're on out, basically directors, usually the ones who are the facilitating sponsors, right? But then each of those pose the challenge, so it's the most relevant kind of pressing issues, respective of those business units, and then of course their customers. And then the entire company responds, right? And then we get together on a day and celebrate innovation around the globe. This year it's going to be in over 15 locations. Right, so it's this big thing, but it's good in some senses. But my question is, so right, what we do is we reward it, and then we actually take each of those different groups. We pick one winning idea, and we actually incubate it. Right, so they get an award, they get some money, but then in addition, they actually incubate the idea within the business unit, using those innovators as kind of primary project manager for it. Right, but my question is, in our particular scenario. While they're innovating and kind of incubating and implementing those ideas, they're not actually pulled out of their particular role. So, one of the inherent values of this is that obviously you can tap expertise collectively across, we have, again, like 53.5 thousand people around the globe. And it might be someone in IT when the challenge came from market, right? But do you have any examples or scenarios or things you could share of where companies have successfully built a risk and reward model? Maybe it's profit sharing, whatever it is, right? So that when somebody has an innovative idea, the executives say, because I think that's really what you need, the executives say, this adds enough value that you can go out of your daily role and actually work on this as your full-time job now. But, right, the caveat there is with risk inherent with the reward. Maybe it's profit sharing, but if you don't do well, you got to have a job. Any examples? I'd like to hear.
So I'll throw in just some of the stuff that we do, right? So I think some of the questions you bring up, recognition, rewards. I think that if you wait for rewards for the final ROI, you see a lot of problems with those, right? You've seen them at the books. Robinson out at UMass talks about innovation, and they have a thing where people sue, right? You say, oh well, I have this thing that's going to save $10 billion, and I want 10%. Right. So then it just winds up in litigation, right? Where the idea itself is not interesting. I think that what we've done is try to create that red meat demo, right? Instead of having a year-long competition, how can you get it down to a day, right? The way I look at it from our side in IT and innovation is, if it takes you 24 hours to roll something out, to get it out, that's 24 hours too long, right? If it takes you 24 hours to get it out, it's too long. You try to shorten that cycle up. I mean, when you talk about the lean enterprise, lean startup, it's all about how quickly can you turn that handle. So I think what we did is we wrote a portal. Now, what company in 2010 would write a portal? We did. We open sourced it. It's been a significant game changer for our corporation. But we showed it in a few hours of work back to one of the directors. The directors called the CIO down and said, "You have to come down now. We have a demo." I mean, 5 minutes in the demo, he stopped the demo and said, "No." Pulled the CIO down and said, "We're going to fund this." And the CIO looked at it and said, "Okay, when can you be done?" So I think it's the red meat demo. How quickly can you get that working code out there?
What's a red meat demo?
So for these sounds
cool. I'm learning all these new words. I learned full stack developer. I learned that the other day. Right? Red meat demo.
So for the vegans and the vegetarians, this is probably a turnoff. But the idea is that for the carnivores, or this could be like the most healthy vegetarian meal, it's this thing that somebody sees and it's so enticing to them. They say, "I have to have it."
Right.
Right? So I think you have to have it.
This is reminding me, so I'm really going to date myself here, so only a few of you will know. Anybody remember Cambridge Technology Group and John Donovan? And so back before personal computers, I know, there were mini computers, and all the mini computer companies got together with this guy, and he hired, because I went to Wellesley, he had Wellesley people, he hired young people directly from colleges. And within a week, they put together an application, and they worked like all hours of the night and day. And the whole point was you could get it done faster, better, cheaper. And they would invite business people, and the IT people would be dragged along, or invite the business people. But it would make the IT people look bad. This was a really long time ago. But it reminds me, it's really this, I mean, people are looking for the same kinds of things. The technology's come a long way, but some of our problems are still the same.
That's interesting.
Most of what he built was just demos though, right? And that really, it was a demo.
It was
It
a
was a
demo,
concept.
and then he said it would work, but people got all excited when they saw it. You're right, you're
Maybe it didn't
absolutely
really
right.
work
And
in
it
this-
did, maybe that's why he didn't continue.
So I don't know, does that kind of?
Yeah, well, you know, it certainly, it breeds food for thought in other areas, right? I don't know, I like the code-off concept, right? And I know FedEx has a phenomenal code-off as well, which is a 24-hour thing. You get all your engineers in a room, let them just drill away at it. But for some of the innovations I'm thinking of, they're both incremental and radical / disruptive / breakthrough, whatever you want to call them. But I just don't know, I don't know. The example I was wondering if anyone in the room knew of is of a company where, you know, you literally take someone out of their daily role to enable them, like to put the faith in them, to enable them to push that innovation forward, right?
I've got the answer.
Yeah, I think I know one example anyway, that I don't generally work with companies, but I have a friend, Carlson, who's written on innovation. He's president of Stanford Research Institute. And he has a disciplined method to innovation. They've spun out a lot of different companies out there. He's got 5 points to it. The first one is work on something really important, an important problem, important market need. Don't waste your time on interesting stuff, work on something important. If you've got 2,500 projects there and you only pick one, my comment about that is the value propositions aren't good enough yet to fund all of them, because if they were really better, you'd be funding them. So you got to improve that. Second thing is right, the value propositions, the important problem, the need, the approach to solving the problem, benefits per unit cost, and also the alternatives if you don't do it, what the competition is going to do to you. The third point of this is the innovation champion. I mentioned that before, somebody who push it forward and be passionate about it. The fourth piece is to have an innovation team and an innovation plan. And so his theory on that is that you generate genius level IQ by having a smart team work on these problems and iterate them with smart customers and stakeholders, and very broadly to rapidly get the best of the idea. And that can include a prototype or a fast type of piece of software or an instantiation of your product to get feedback, real feedback about that. And the last piece of that is to have organizational alignment. And this comes through in that when they found good things and they have spun out and built brand new businesses, they found funding for it, VC funding, and in some cases the whole team moves out. So that team, when they started working on something, got taken out of their regular job, what they were doing, and put on something, not always, but in some cases, and that team became the core of this new company. Okay, so there is a precedent for that type of a behavior, I believe.
Thank you.
Isn't there that famous, you know, when Steve Jobs was working on the first Mac, he took a group of engineers and completely separated them from the organization. So literally ripped them out of what they were doing and had them do. And I think, you know, Michael, you were talking about that. To really foster innovation, you can't be bound by the internal antibodies or policies and controls that sort of govern the way things happen. So I think, yeah, it makes sense to kind of detach that.
So these are great, phenomenal examples. What I want to do is make that part of the policies, right? So I don't think I gave our program enough clout as I was describing it earlier. It's signed on by all the executives, right? And we don't pick one winner, we pick one winner for each sponsoring organization, right? We've had instances where there's been spin-offs, we have instances where there's companies that you would know of that we've created out of this. You know, it's generated literally hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of the past 5 years. So it's a big program. The next step for this program is to make it less tangential to the innovators themselves. What I want to see is greater ownership stake from the innovators themselves in the success, the relative success, or the relative failure of the project, right? So I'm not thinking, because we have that all the time, right? We've had teams built around it. As I mentioned, we've had spin-offs. The first VMware virtualization desktop software came through our competition, right? vClone it was called. A lot of different things. You know, but again, how do you empower the innovator more? Because sometimes also, frankly, a business unit will get a great idea, and they'll take it and they'll run with it, but the original ideator doesn't necessarily have that major of a role in it anymore, right? And I mean, situationally, the specifics change. We have, a tracking mechanism we call them incubation readiness levels that takes us through prototype and basically each different phase to implementation, commercialization, to next step, definitions, that kind of stuff. But at some point, the idea is going to evolve from what the original person said this should be to what it actually becomes, right? But how do you keep them involved? So I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation.
Could you create like an internal grant structure, maybe? Like, so instead of a reward, you create a prize. Then what you do is you survey all these different ideas, and then so you got this innovator, right? He wins this prize, and then you use some type of funding or some type of internal grant mechanism to allow the parent to allow this, to create an incubation environment for that innovator. Right. To say, hey, you know what? You're going to get some budget, you're going to get some staff, because if everybody signed on all the way up, and we looked at all these ideas, and we think there's 2 or 3, and we're going to pick that one. Can you actually empower that employee? Instead of saying, hey, let's work on the idea, can you extract them in a funded way and give him kind of his own little research tank and allow him to get it to a point where it can be absorbed by the bigger company?
Exactly.
But so maybe peel out, some grant prizes or something like that for people that really want to do something entrepreneurial within the context of a bigger company.
Exactly.
But you're picking up on the schizophrenic nature of it, because basically organizations are an industrial age construct. Because they're created to run a business, not to create a business. That's an abnormal act. What are you giving birth here? I thought we were running at Six Sigma here, right? But there are examples. I mean, as I think about you going to the innovation literature, you find people like Gore, right? From Vortex, right? Where basically the hero, if you will, there are archetypal heroes in a culture, which is your brilliant opening question, right? Is like they say like your job is to work on a project until you find something to birth a new business.
Yes.
Versus, at EMC, wonderful there it is like your job is to run a business, right? And grow a business. But what are you doing like creating a new business? We want margins on this other business.
You still retain it. I mean, we're a serial acquirer. I want to build more on our own rather than spending all this
you're not alone.
money.
You've got obvious CEO written all over you because Jeff Immel, who basically I've seen him naked, so I know. But he was my roommate.
TMI. True story. I was reading up to him.
My roommate at Dartmouth College, right? It wasn't believe me, watching him, I said, I don't see GE future, no, anyway, so I'm blind, I'm like, anyway.
Stop digging.
So Jeff will tell you, he said, like, here's the deal, if I can get people inside my organization to grow business, right, that costs me $1, right?
Exactly.
If I have to buy that on the marketplace, right, that costs me $150, right? So there's the returns, as Gavin will tell you, the returns to entrepreneurship are enormous, but organizations are not set up that way because it's disruptive.
But what's happening though is the shelf life of a product, however you package the product, software, idea, service, physical widget, that shelf life is increasingly diminishing. Right? I mean, we heard the comment about Facebook's releasing new code feature functionality, Zing is writing new mobile games, right, almost every day. So because the shelf life is so short, you have to have that perpetual innovation. And I come from a very innovative company. And I'm in a lot of meetings where people are looking for ideas. It makes me think of like those that remember a couple years back the IBM commercials where there's a guy and he brought his boss down. He says, "Check this thing out." And he said, "What is it?" He goes, "It's an avatar." He's like, "Well, what do I do with it?" He goes, "Oh, well, you can dress them up and you can name them." And the guy goes, "But how do I make money with it?" Right? So, and the point was everybody's searching for that idea, right? The next business. But you're right. Big companies are really
You asked the real question. The billion-dollar question is, how do I make money? All right, remember, I teach at 4 business schools, right? And a lot of those kids have forgotten that ultimately, how do I make money? It's amazing. I mean, they think I'm coming out, from the Harvard Business School, and I've got $180,000. And I'm going, okay, and you're interviewing, and I said, how am I going to make $180,000 on your well-groomed butt? How is that going to happen? Because I said, what do you mean? I said, you think there's a tree that tops out like $180,000? They said, no, the customers, what are you going to do? They don't understand where the money comes from. Now that I've totally backtracked, I went to a lovely school. I'm sorry. I didn't go there. Talk to the microphone.
So I have an idea that kind of butts up to what you're talking about. And it derives from work these 2 professors at UC Berkeley did on maximizing the value of intangible assets, and more specifically IP.
Yeah.
So they asked the question, if you're divesting a trade secret, a patent, something, what maximizes its value in the market?
Mm.
And they said the number one thing that maximizes the value of a divested IP is the business model of the acquiring firm.
Yeah.
And he says, essentially what you need to do is you need to create a spreadsheet for each type of acquirer for the IP, and then say how much incremental revenue will this company make with given the assumptions of their marketing, sales, and service infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of parachute it in, plug and play. How much incremental revenue will I get? And it'll be some percentage of that they're willing to pay.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Because that's all they're doing.
Yeah.
They're buying future free cash flow.
Yeah.
So it seems to me the way by which the one thing that you could do to kind of really make it real for everyone is to actually say, if EMC were to buy this product fully developed,
That's great.
right?
Not sure it costs.
How much would EMC be willing to pay for that? And then as a function of that, how could we create some phantom shares or some sort of a financial representation of that future free cash flow
Right.
that would in effect stimulate the limbic part of their brain,
Yeah.
which is the red meat, which is the business end of red meat, which is how do I get so invested in this that it's like oxygen to me?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're trying to do.
That's good.
You're trying to move it from it's a nice idea to I've got to have it,
Right.
right?
Right. That's great. That's great perspective. Thank you. Yeah.
But even in that example, let's kind of walk it through. You're an EMC, so you get this incentive system. And the alternative is you being outside the company working for some VCs that ask you the same question every day. When's the product going to be ready? When's the product going to be ready? When's the product going to be ready? Singly focused, a single red dot versus the distractions of living at a big corporation, other projects you were working on, lack of focus or discipline from your master in case of the VC. So it may work, but you have to then simulate other dimensions of the environment
Yeah.
to drive that person or team to success.
Well, less resources externally, right? I mean, that's the other thing that we can offer, right? People don't join this for the small, whether you want to call it grant, or the small amount of money that we actually give out. They join it because they want to see their idea come into practice, right? And while it doesn't always immediately result in immediate profit sharing of the final result, whether it's a product, service, or even an internal process improvement, they get promoted. They get visibility. There's a guy who is, working in manufacturing, but still is, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But he had a very quiet job. He was, kind of shifting boxes around. Came up from, basically that role. We had him at EMC World in front of 20,000 people with the chief marketing officer last year. I mean, it's great stuff, right? You talk about recognition, visibility. If you come up with a great idea, there needs to be a venue or an outlet for that. And then the key, as you mentioned, is commercialization, right? So we just make sure that we have the other end of it in place and we're actually making money with it. But I think that to get back to your point, the key is in having something that actually, delivers and having the resources internally that someone wouldn't have externally. But the other question is, for the really big ideas, and we've had a couple of them, but I don't want to say we've had a million of them, for someone who has a Facebook type idea or an eBay type idea or whatever, the incentive structure is so much better for them to go outside to the VC community and make literally millions, billions on their IPO, on their sale, on their essentially getting it off. The risk is much, much, much higher, but the reward is so much higher too, right? If you're looking at pure numbers. So I want to incentivize the breakthrough people, right? And that's because we incentivize the incremental people. We knock it out of the friggin' park with incremental, right? Because that's easy to do.
The challenge to that is that most of the great ideas, most of those great, brilliant breakthrough ideas, was only discovered in hindsight.
Very good point.
Facebook was, what was Facebook? What was the animating idea for Facebook?
People at Harvard connect.
No, it was called Thursday Night Nookie.
Yeah.
That's what it was about.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah. And I like
And
to
then
use
kind of,
Nicky. Yeah.
but so what I'm trying to say
I'm
is,
trying to imagine what the cover of your book's going to look like.
It's going to be a nude picture of Jeffrey Imnall.
There's a great book written in the late 80s by McKinsey and Company. I forget the guy's name. It's called innovation is the attacker's advantage, and this is pre-anything. You know, pre-personal computer almost, pre-internet, et cetera. And basically talked a dozen companies that consistently attack themselves through process innovation, product innovation, management innovation, really without the benefit or much leverage of technology. So you may want to look at that just to sort of see some concepts that are sort of almost devoid of technology.
Innovation through.
It's innovation is the attacker's advantage. It's probably been updated by the guy a couple times. The only benefit of having gray hairs. Some memory of reading books and meetings.
That's good input.
You asked if any company has a good system. I was at IBM a number of years, but I left 15 years ago. So when I was there, they do have a really good reward system for people to do ideas. First, they started with the called suggestion box. They didn't have staff review every single suggestion, and they just give the cash if it's a small idea. And if it's a big idea, they give you a portion of the revenue they make.
So they do.
For a certain number of years. And now they call idea, they don't call suggestion, it's all online, all that stuff. I don't know if they changed the rewards, I'm sure they changed the reward over the years, you know. But they do have an extremely matured one. When State Street was looking for, you know, when I took the Chief Innovation Officer's job, and I was looking for, you know, large company had done really well in the area. So IBM Senior VP, Linda Semple came to talk to us about their system and all that stuff, you know. You can look into the detail how they manage that one.
Yeah, thank you.
Because they do have a really good reward system. They even promote them to distinguished engineer title of fellow. Fellow is their highest ranking. And then you got the picture in the research lab and all those things.
Are you familiar with Jeff Nick by any chance? He was the EMC CTO. He came from IBM. He was the first fellow. He started the FDE program in the Innovation Network. He's my boss once removed, right? And now we have a new corporate CTO. But he's the one who started this whole
I know
big
almost
thing that I
everybody
manage
in
now.
EMC
So.
because
Do you?
they
I
recorded me
apologize
for the
for you.
executive training.
Oh yeah, good, very good. Interesting.
Well, this morning we started off about talking about changing the name of CIOs to Chief Innovation Officers. And that means a change in perception and probably some work on your part. So from all you've heard today and all you've discussed today, what are some of the first steps you might take to change the perception of your company or your place of work to think of you as a Chief Innovation Officer?
We have one here, right?
Yeah. I tell you, just quick background because a lot of people don't know me. I started my career with IBM and then left IBM, went to Merrill Lynch, and then came to State Street. But I was with State Street over 11 years now. But I did 10 years of technology infrastructure. Basically, they used to have a disjointed group, and then I consolidated all of them. And now somebody mentioned that they voted for disjointed direction. We found that every year I was able to save the company $30–40 million in my budget and absorb all the growth as well. The unit costs come down drastically because you can do with the volume discount or that you can do a lot more with just reduce the number of vendors and all that stuff. You know. There's a benefit. So we did a lot of forward-thinking things. And then my boss said, you've done this job for 10 years, do you want to do anything different? I said, somebody can do the day-to-day, so I don't wake up middle of the night anymore, and I can do the innovation because I was doing 2 jobs. Right? Now, over the years, one thing we have done is, every time when we did forward-thinking stuff, we went out to benchmark with the market. So over the last 10 years, my group received 32 awards recognition by either the bank magazine or technology magazine or organization. We didn't compete with all our colleagues in Wall Street. And so I say I want to do this innovation job. Right? Now most people first ask, what is it? What do you think you're doing? First is I went way beyond IT. Because it's not just IT, it's a whole company. But then I looked into it. Company has a lot of the organization already doing innovation. Obviously, we've been in business for 220 years. State Street is still the leader in the markets that we play. We still institutional clients. And so product group has a lot of innovation. One of the funds State Street started first is called ETF, the exchange trading fund. Now it's a huge success, you know. So I'm looking at, okay, they do really well in that. How come not the whole company give good ideas? So we engage the relationship management, which they touch the customers, right? And the marketing, communications, product group. Every business unit has their own product group. So we put all the different groups. We have applied research. They do the CEO study and all those things. Everybody together start talking about how can we inspire innovation in the whole company. And it really starts, first we build a website so everybody can do blogging. And all that kind of work, we hire young students to come in. I even told this co-op student, she was junior in Northeastern University. I said, Anna, don't talk to anybody in the company. You build a Facebook in a very good professional taste for safety. And did a phenomenal job. But if you talk to somebody, guess what? Somebody is going to say, no, don't do it. Right. And I took a lot of abuse, actually, after the site. Number one is, we didn't want to own the site. My group called Innovation Office, I said, nobody owns the site. It's everybody's site. So it's called State Street Innovates. Right? And then, we don't call all they call mission, vision, the standard corporate stuff. We don't want any of these, we let people brainstorm, call inner talk, inner challenge. And we get the inner talk, it's almost like the show on TV, facilitator with a couple, people sitting there and do a conversation on it. And it was a huge success, all these multiple things. The last thing we did was called Innovation Challenge. They call Raleigh at the end, And it's engaged 30,000 people you can sign up. And we block the executive time to carry a conversation with people. Literally, I can see Asian Pacific executive come talking about this. Say, are we shy? State Street is very conservative, So he said, are we shy? And I immediately said, I think we're conservative. I wouldn't call shy, we're conservative. We don't brag about what we have done. We keep it kind of a low key. Expect people should know us. I said, no.
Is anybody else shy, not shy? You want to add to the dialogue? Anybody? Chief Innovation Officer? All introverts?
Sounds like
Introverts, raise your hand.
Sounds like she's saying you have to do things differently and get a lot of people involved, right? That's what I got out of that.
It was, we got thousands of ideas.
Right.
Yeah, you changed the frame right away. You didn't think about it as a technology problem. You stepped way back and you thought about, beginning to end, company-wide, which is so characteristic of lateral thinking, that changing the frame right at the beginning.
Also, people like to complain. A lot of people just voice their opinion. Yeah. But when you're online, what you can do, we have a lot of people we identify.
Anonymously complain?
You need to interfere with just a complaint. Yeah. And so somebody say, why do we do this way or something? They say, since you know this is not good, what is your suggestion? Right. Immediately. It was fantastic, that company.
So I'm just reminded, as you were asking this question, about something that happened at MIT a couple of years ago. When I first got there, it was just ending. We went through the fiscal crisis, which a lot of universities are still going through, and they pulled together 200 people. There's thousands that work there and thousands of students and 1,000 faculty, and the 200 people were all on 9 task forces, and the task forces all worked together. And they had something called an idea bank, which we are now restarting in IT for ideas on employee engagement and ideas on a couple of other things. Everybody submitted ideas to the idea bank. There wasn't any money that came out of it, but if their ideas got accepted, there was prestige that came out of it. And what it made me think of when you were talking is having a cause, having somebody set an important business problem to work on, a cause, and having things that, if you're gonna have a lot of people, they can rally around, like we needed to address this fiscal situation and everybody came together and the whole thing about Kennedy and getting to the moon and all that. I mean, just picking something that people can get excited about and realizing that they're adding value and contributing and empowering people way down in the organization.
Right, and the same thing at EMC, right? You have
Yeah.
EVPs sign off on, these are the critical things for my business unit. Right.
If I think you're asking a wonderful question. There's this real politics.
Can I show up my review?
Yes, okay, we'll show. But the question is, who owns innovation in the business today? Because this is a powerful piece of responsibility. And that's like one of the things you learn is like raise your hand and step up to it, right? You march to the sound of the guns, right? So a lot of times we defer to others, you know, but is there an incumbent in charge of it? Because when you stepped up and all of a sudden did innovation, everybody says, wow, I should have, wait, how'd you get there, right? You know, I mean, and so, but like, is it an uncontested space, or is there somebody there that you have to move out? That's what, like, and because I really do think this space has to be filled very effectively in an organization. Like I think at EMC, one of the people who's probably stepping up to that is because you do have a whole lot of wonderful innovators in that space, but basically your CMO is basically not a CMO. I mean, he actually builds businesses. He's a very unique CMO. He's not just a message guy. He's a business guy. He understands what's going on. Yeah, Jeremy. Right?
Yeah, so now John Robes from Huawei is taking over the innovation piece of the pie, right? So it was Jeff Nick and now it's John Rose, and yeah, so. But so he's on, but the fact is, structurally, John is under Jeremy. So you're absolutely right. Jeremy's been kind of eyeballing from a distance the innovation programs for a while that I and my team run, and now he's kind of saying, ooh, let's bring it over here. So I think
it's a good place to be. And if it's uncontested, step up to it. I mean, like, because it's not a bad thing. Versus, oh, let's be the people responsible for things that go boom in the middle of the night. Let's get out of that business and get into the, wow, people love us and you're making us some money business.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting what has happened, I think, in universities, because a number of years ago, when we were doing IT strategic planning and we were talking to the deans about some innovative thinking, that we were, some innovative ideas that we thought would help them, they were like, oh no, everything's just fine, just how it is. You know, we're 250 years old and we don't want to do anything right. But I think universities now have embraced this idea of invention, reinventing themselves, and innovation. And in universities, you have to have the president and the senior people have to embrace that. The faculty also have to embrace that. And so it has to, come from all areas. And I think IT now becomes also a facilitator of ideas, but doesn't have to own innovation because everybody else is also owning it. And when IT tries to own innovation and no one else buys into it, it just goes blah. You know, it just doesn't work.
Bill, I would just say, I think innovation should be more of a behavior than a position. And I think that great companies have a behavioral attribute that spawns innovation, as opposed to trying to harness it into an office or an accountability or an organizational thing. And I think that's what happens with startups, in companies that can be very quick and agile. So how do you take that innovative behavior, that attribute, and how do you embed that into a bigger organization? And I think that gets back to the key point of culture, which I think Tom mentioned it earlier, and actually, man, you mentioned it too, the common cause stuff, right? You have to believe in what you're doing. And something that gets overlooked a lot, I see in companies, is the feedback mechanism. When you do something great, it's more than just a reward. You have to, should CIO become Chief Information Officer, or should CIO really become Internal Collaboration Officer, right? Should it be ICO instead of CIO, right? And what do they really do there?
But one of the things, for example, at Kaiser Permanente, we have seen like Phil Pisano basically run the innovation organization, doesn't take credit for it, right? But innovation in a large enterprise, and they've got 8 million insured lives, is an unnatural act.
Yeah.
Because why can't we innovative as a startup? Because we're not a startup. I mean, when you're a startup, all there is innovation, right? And then you hit that magic moment where you're not innovative anymore, type of stuff. So you do need some type of like pulse repeater or something to like re-institutionalize or revitalize your innovation type of, and he does that because he actually keeps the innovation hope alive throughout the enterprise type of thing. So he runs, basically, the classic like days of innovation and the celebrations of innovation, and he institutionalizes this type of stuff. So and the people who are working that type of thing, but he is in the game. He's not perceived as being against innovation.
Yeah, it should be some of that manifest innovation that's occurring everywhere else in the organization, right? Because that's what their job will be, is to take, to what you're trying to build, right? Grab those ideas and figure out how they funnel up.
Exactly.
There's to this idea of, mature organizations versus early stage growth. Jeffrey Moore wrote a book, Dealing with Darwin. And one of the things he stresses in that is, within the category of your offering, whether it be that early stage, crossing the chasm and inside the tornado, all that, the prior books, he takes that idea and extends it to more mature organizations, and there are certain types of innovations that yield more in those later stages, maturity, growth, or even in decline. And so in weeding through the ideas, you can get 1,000 great ideas, but they may not be so well suited to you as a startup, or they may not be so well suited to you as a growth company or a mature company. So, it's a kind of a useful framework, I think, to kind of look at, and then sort of take into consideration the organizational context, which, has that interpersonal human dimension, as your structural dimension, and it has, political and symbolic dimensions. Hey, IBM went through the transformation from product to service company. I'll bet you there were a lot of people in IBM saying, hey, we're a hardware company. And what's all this talk about services? So, those two sort of lens through which you kind of view it helps a more mature organization kind of, look at innovation in a different way, because it's top line, bottom line, business partner, business model. It's not just new stuff.
Right.
We all get locked into, an innovation's got to be something new or something that's invented. Well, not necessarily. Maybe we have an existing offering for a new market to reposition it, or some other types of innovations. So
does an organization need a cheerleader, an innovation cheerleader? Like manager yourself or someone, and how do you find that person to make that happen? Or to get everybody else engaged?
Sort of tangentially related. I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley. It's not even startups, but I mostly work with large companies. So I'm constantly sort of comparing the differences between the two. It seems like that one of the biggest impediments to innovation in a large company that doesn't even need to exist is that large companies organize individual roles and parts of their company around process and product as opposed to objectives. And startups don't do that just because they're sort of objective-based. Well, we'll change our process as need be. And so you end up with these impediments to innovation where a person says, well, my job is as part of the process. So if it helps the company to improve it, that's not good for me because then I would lose mine. What would I do? Or our job is to protect this product, so even if our company should. So I think that in order to really encourage innovation, it's not that companies need to do something different, but they need to organize a little different, more around objectives and less around product and process.
That's a great point. Yeah, the only other thing I would add is it needs to be across. So it's interesting. I've heard a lot of statistics thrown around being on an innovation team, right? They say that most innovation teams fail within 5 years, right? Or they reach a certain stage of maturity and then fail if you're not constantly innovating on the innovation team. Average good size is like 8 to 10, something like that, people on the team. But it needs to be a centrally located organization too, right? Which has cross-cutting visibility. So traditionally, apparently, any group that does incubation and implementation is traditionally housed in a CTO office or CIO office, someone that's purview over all the BUs. And then an idea competition and or kind of a conference gathering thing is housed within marketing. So just kind of food for thought there. We're kind of bold. But then, the other thing I wanted to mention is the problem with a large, mature, or growing, or whatever, any kind of large organization with a number of people is every BU and the person who heads up that respective BU has, especially for a publicly traded company, they have their own agenda. They have their own objective set, et cetera. So if you don't have a team that is unbiased to any particular BU, who is helping to usher forward the innovation agenda based on the core tenets of the company, right? Basically your core competencies and the vision for the company over the course of the next 5 years. If you don't have a completely separate team that's helping each of them to accomplish their own objective, it's kind of like Thomas Paine Wealth of Nations, right? I mean, everybody doing, for their own good, but, you need someone who maps that back to the original corporate objectives. And that's why I think, to answer your question, you do need some kind of a cheerleader or a team of cheerleaders who is in it for the good of the greater good, right? Rather than, well, here's why I'm going to make my bonus for this quarter based on sales.
But isn't that Mark's point of you're not the chief information officer, you're the chief information communications officer?
ICO, right?
I mean, that's sort of Michael brought it up in this thing, right?
Right.
Because you see this in innovation teams. We've had them, groups outside of the mainstream, hybrid, where they get the people from the inside and inside. If you can't get them, that idea of integrate back into some part of the corporation.
Exactly.
Right? And that's where you talk about, right? If you don't have somebody that can speak the language, know the hidden pathways to get this into production, get it past the uncle right? You got to have that. So that's where I think the CIO is perfectly poised, because they're servicing all the business units. They should know all the players, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think the ownership of the idea, I mean, if we're talking about, because a lot of our discussion, to me, has been innovation that's customer facing.
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely agree, that needs to be in the office of CTO. But the enablement for how that comes to life, that's more where maybe the morphing role of what you said, the connections and integrating the rest of the organization so that idea can have legs and live, right? But the actual idea itself, that's a CTO function, I would think.
But your CIO, your customers are your internal people, right? I mean, to a large extent. So, you're right with process stuff. Maybe it would make sense for the CIO to also be the chief innovation officer for their own, right? There's instances where that is the case.
Yeah. Mike, you have something?
Yeah. I want to share a story about a project I did with Randstad, which is one of the largest temporary flex worker groups. But it goes to a larger point, which I want to introduce first, and that is innovation and how money gets spent are tightly coupled in ways that are difficult to explain, other than they are essentially inseparable. So depending on how companies do their budgeting, really correlates to what kind of innovation will occur if anyone decides to step forward. So it seems to me, again, the Kaplan and Norton guys, the balanced scorecard guys, make a case for what they call not just OpEx and CapEx, but StratEx, or strategic expense. A set aside that exists for the sole purpose of driving the business forward through innovation. And he says, and that has to be protected, just like, and so even when you've got a bad quarter, the StratEx budget doesn't get cut. Right?
That's good.
So aside from that, my experience at Randstad was that they had a very big, Randstad is a very distributed firm. And in fact, their real business, the real place of business are these little retail kiosks, or these little retail stores that have two consultants in them that do the staffing just within a 8 or 10 block area. And so they've got a really small headquarters staff, but he does it across multiple countries. So I'm thinking, well, this is what he did as a CMO. I think there's a parallel with what you could do with a CIO in this context. He said, what will happen is I'll have a couple of my markets, like Germany, that always wants to push, they want the next system or something like that. And I say, look, so he says, look, I will match you euro for euro in terms of what you're going to spend for this particular graphics server or document server or sourcing. I'll match you euro for euro on two conditions. One is that you follow these particular technical standards. So it was a .NET kind of thing. So no more Java. It's got to be .NET, right? Or whatever the standard was. And the second obligation is that while you're going to be the first one in the overall company to have this new service, you have now an obligation to train the rest of the companies on how to adopt it. And so what he did is we then convened an academy where they met twice a year. So all the marketing managers and all the communications managers went to a really nice place in Barcelona or Ibiza or whatever, you know, nice place, and they did an operational review of the systems and processes. And that's where the lead companies also did the ideation and adoption support for the lag countries to come up to speed with. So that was kind of more of a process innovation as opposed to a product innovation. But it comes back to make my point, it comes back to allocation of the money, and specifically, how can I allocate money with strings attached to it such that it then gets generalized to the organization.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. State Street decided to fund innovation, so I went forward, tried to convince the executive. It was so interesting. They did far more funding than I expected.
Hate it when that happens.
Why the CEO decided to give that amount? Now, where is he going to get the money? Obviously, tax all the business units, right? Now he said, even though I want to give that much, but we need to get all these core management committee members to vote for it. Now your job is to figure out how they will vote for that. So I decided to sit down with each of them and go through why we need this funding, what we intend to do. One of the executives owns 2 business units, of the 3 major ones. And he says, well, why do we want to give you the money when we have such a tight budget and all that stuff? You know, like his feeling is you're playing the same box, right? I say, I know you have a lot of strategic items you want to achieve. He said, absolutely. I said, what if all the money is funding all your items? If you can make a business case. All of a sudden, you can see the light bulb light. His eyes just blinking. He said, what a great idea. I said, now your job is to think about, in our brainstorm, how you get your people to put all their good ideas to achieve your goals. And then all the funding will go to you. Turns out, the CEO had no problem. Everybody voted that because everybody thought that total amount could be invested in their business unit. So they got total buy-in, you know, which is good because then you got a competition going on, right? You make everybody better.
That's interesting. And did that ever backfire at all? I'm sorry, I have to see.
No. It was funded. It was finalized.
Yeah.
And I just heard everybody suffering with their operating budget next year because the money is taken out to fund the new ideas.
Tell you got cojones. If you had gone in there, said that, and then basically one of them did get funded and the rest didn't, I could see where that would.
But the key, I was telling my boss, I said, you got to make sure that the group innovation, you know, that new ideas runs away from the normal business unit. You got to run it like a VC or like a startup, company. Yeah. Otherwise, it will be cut out. The minute their budget is tight, they cut out that piece. It has to run separately.
So, Bill, on a different scale, our example might be useful for this group. And our problem has not really had to do with the ideation aspects. It hasn't had to do with the funding aspects. It had to do with the friction involved in getting the ideas actually implemented. So we went through, moved back 7, 8 years, waterfall software development and the whole thing. Different groups have different priorities, that sort of thing. And what we ultimately did was we iterated to a model where today it's all agile software first development, but the group that actually prioritizes what that agile group does is a set of business executives. And in fact, I'm not even on that group anymore. I used to be on it, but we realized that I was the hurdle. The guy who should be there is a software user. So he sits on that group. So every 2 weeks, there's a prioritization hour. And they have their video conference and they come up with what are we going to do over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And of course, you have the next 2 weeks over. And then the model essentially is the ideation has occurred because these individual business executives are getting their ideas from their own teams, right? The top salespeople bubble up their ideas to the person in charge of that, of the line side, et cetera, et cetera. So the prioritization occurs, goes right into the software development queue, and if it's an urgent idea, that idea could actually be under scoping and development within the year. So from our perspective, it wasn't a budgeting, it wasn't where the ideas kind of problem. It was how do we remove the friction from the process so we can really get it out and use that quickly.
Sounds political though, too, right? I mean, if you have business, all the business executives are the ones ultimately making decisions, which is, it's unrealistic to think that that's not the case in any company. But ideally, if you want a relatively unbiased group, right? So if they're being fed the same information from their own individual business units, then there could be political bias there. Someone's not going to say, hey, I have this idea that should revolutionize our particular BU, for fear of, right, well, it's Jim who heads up that BU, and Jim created, X, Y, or Z product, which is the mainstay of that BU. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you're arguing
that political friction, or?
If you're, I don't think political as much. I think the argument that could be made against it is we're getting more incremental innovation than breakthrough. Right. I think that's certainly good.
Quickest thing, I know we have another speaker coming in a few minutes, but before we do that, a little bit of the carbo drain, feels like? A lot of people kind of there. Quick stand up. Yeah, stand up, yeah. Move around. There we go. Feel the energy.
Cherry picking.
Move around, breathe, blood flowing again. Because we do want everybody wide awake for our next speaker in a few minutes.
I thought you might do something.
Perfect time.
I didn't want to kick it, but I was like, oh,
So I know that we want to thank all of the great discussion. The audience was amazing, as Thornton would say. Highly curated, did an amazing job.
Brilliantly led by our amazing panel. Round of applause.